Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us this evening. We are here to talk about the FY2026 proposed budget. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we begin. This is the FY2026 proposed budget, which will start July 1st. If you have any questions while we're going through the presentation, please feel free to throw that into the chat, and our team will be able to help get those to us to be answered at the end. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I am Shane Hill, budget manager here for Chesterfield County. I have with me Coleman Wells, our budget analyst as well, to help do the presentation and answer questions along the way.
Okay, let's get started. So I'll be covering the economic backdrop. First off, one of the first things we look at when talking about framing the context for the budget are the economic conditions, both in terms of longer run trends as well as what the most recent data is telling us. And the labor market in particular is something we keep close eye on and is really a driver for the economy as a whole. When the labor market is strong, that feeds into other aspects of the economy, and when it's not, the opposite tends to be true. So when you look at the trends from the past several years, you'll see a general slowing of the economy. The overall trends for these two graphs are highlighted by those red and teal lines that show a gradual decline from those post-pandemic highs. The chart to the right captures this well, with a little over 350,000 jobs added in 2022, down to 200 in 2023, and around 150,000 in 2024. Sorry, there's a little bit of technical difficulties. Hope that doesn't jump forward. Okay, and so anyone who watches the news more recently knows that the economic conditions have been characterized with a high degree of uncertainty. Consumer sentiment is down. There are strong inflationary expectations among any number of warning signs in the economy today. And when you combine the longer run trends of a slowing economy with the high degree of uncertainty being faced, it's led to this budget being built with an increased number of safeguards in mind, as we'll touch on later in the presentation. So residential revaluations is another consideration. Over the last few years, there has been atypical growth in residential revaluations, which was due to a variety of factors impacting housing prices, both locally and nationally. While the past 3 to 4 years have been elevated, you'll see that FY 2025 number inching closer to the longer run average of 4%. The bars on the right of this graph tend to get most of the attention, which is understandable, but it's also important to take the longer run view into consideration, as there is a period of 12 consecutive years of reevaluations coming in under that longer run average of 4%, and 5 consecutive years where there was a decline in residential revaluations from 2009 to 2013. So that kind of covers the economic backdrop of what we were considering when this budget was being built. And now I'll get into some of the recent developments that we've done in the past couple of years. So this first slide, before Shane gets to the FY 2026 budget items, just touch base on this. It's always helpful to cover some of those recent actions that lay out how we got where we are today. In that vein, here's a list of some of the major things we've accomplished over the last 3 to 4 years. It's worth noting that many of these items were a result of deferred needs that built up during a 10-year period of subdued budgeted growth following the Great Recession. So starting from the top, those first 2 points, compensation related, with roughly $87 million each towards public safety and teacher pay to establish pay plans and address issues with compression. There was $58 million given to schools so they could catch up on several deferred major maintenance needs that had built up during that time. And additionally, there was $505 million to address capacity in schools, with projected capacity expected to decrease to around 85% once all planned schools are open. Lastly, we were able to establish a new source of funding for the county's transportation infrastructure needs through the CVTA, investing $427 million over the last several years. So tax relief is another big issue, a big point of focus for the county. I won't go through all of these, but this slide highlights some of the various ways the county was able to provide tax relief in recent years. Tax relief has and continues to be a priority for the county. Whether you're a business, a senior, you own a car or a house, there's been targeted actions taken to minimize increases in tax burden for residents. Just this past year, the personal property tax rate was reduced to $3.35, which was the lowest amongst localities with a population of 100,000 or more. And lastly, in the bottom left, you'll see the Board of Supervisors approved a 5% credit on real estate bills in June utilizing year-end surplus monies. And with that, I'll pass over to Shane, and he's going to cover what's included in the FY 2026 operating budget.
Thanks, Coleman. So we say all of that to kind of put in perspective that FY26 budget was not built in a vacuum. All of those investments that we've been able to accomplish over the last recent years, as well as that emphasis on tax relief, have really helped to craft the operating plan and the capital plan for the FY26 fiscal year. So what you're seeing now is the general fund budget. That is where most of your real estate and property taxes flow to. The proposed general fund budget, you can see, is proposed a little over $1 billion, and it's just an increase of 4.4% over last year's budget. On that chart, you can see we've broken down that general fund budget into some key areas. Education, making up about 40% of our overall general fund budget, is the local monies that schools gets from the county. That doesn't include state or federal funding that the schools may receive, just the local portion. Public safety is just a hair, almost to 30%, and kind of even split between community services and engagement and infrastructure. You kind of see those forward-facing departments in community services and engagement, like social services, parks and recreation, libraries, really any of those customer service-facing departments that deal with the public on an ongoing basis. Infrastructure and community development, it's going to be your debt service payments as well as your capital project funding. Again, we like to see that even split between the two. And lastly, we don't talk about it a lot, but support functions, that's all your behind-the-scenes people, like accounting, us, the budget department, information technology, HR, all the likes. Those really behind-the-scenes people that really are the backbone to this organization. We do like to keep it relatively low every year, about 7 cents of every dollar. So if you think about it in that sense, about 93 cents of every dollar is going towards education, public safety, and those community-facing departments. So what are some of the highlights of the proposed general fund budget? Again, this is the general fund budget that's effective July 1. This budget is built on an 89-cent real estate tax rate. That is a reduction of 1 cent from the prior year and the fourth consecutive year that we have been able to reduce the real estate rate. It's also the lowest on record. First time we've been in the 80s, so we've got that built in the plan as well. We did just talk about the general fund total. You see that 4.4% increase compared to last year, which was down from 5% last year's budget. One of the testaments to how this budget was built with a conservative approach and flexibility in mind is that there are only 4 net new positions being added to the general fund budget. With the uncertainty that's going on and possibly could happen over the next 16 months, we don't want to get in that position where we're adding a ton of new positions, and unfortunately we'd have to go back and say, I'm sorry, have some bad news for you. We don't want to put ourselves in that position. We also don't want to put ourselves in the position to have to go back to you all, the taxpayer, to adjust whatever may come out of the economy. So a lot of flexibility has been built in this plan. We want to make sure that this budget is built, that it is able to survive whatever may come out of the economic environment over the next few months. So getting in from the crosswalk to FY25 to FY26, I'm not going to walk through every bits and piece of this slide, but if you like math problems, this one's for you. You can see that FY25 adopted budget at the top for $998 million, the 26 proposed budget down at the bottom for $1 billion, as well as the changes in the middle. Again, we're going to go through some of these over the next few slides and talk about each of these sections in detail. So again, the biggest piece of the general fund budget is schools. Schools on their side is also projecting about a 4.4% increase, which is in line with the general fund side. So again, you see that very balanced plan, considering both of these plans have slowed down considerably over the last few years. 3% increase for school-based personnel, as well as additional support for special education and English language learners. Again, we've seen that growing population in the county, as well as shifting some of those priorities and needs in the school division. So those are included in the budget. Something else that's good that's included in the budget is some additional support for some mental health services, particularly after hours. Schools does a great job with students while they're there during the day. And what this would end up being would be a pilot that would offer school kids the abilities to call a telehealth line after schools if they need help or they need to talk to someone. It's a pilot program, so we're testing that out, but it's been used elsewhere in the state and has shown some promising results and some success. So we're excited that that's in the budget as well. Opening a new middle school out on Western Hull Street, Tomahawk Creek Middle, has been probably one of the most congested schools in the county. So the opening of Deep Creek Middle School later this August will hopefully help relieve some of that capacity congestion. With a new school, you have those operating costs, whether it be personnel, utilities, electric bills, of the likes. So again, that's included in the budget. Lastly, just to kind of talk about that last point, reduce reliance on one-time funds. You're seeing that same flexibility idea on the school side with them stepping down on their one-time funds or savings, as you will. We want to make sure we have that money in case the economy makes a turn for the worse, in order so that we can keep providing those services that we provide today. Talking a little bit about compensation, we are a people business. You call 911. You expect a police officer or firefighter to show up in a quick amount of time. So there are some key compensation initiatives that we're including in the FY2026 proposed budget as well. That first one, we did an adjustment mid-year for some first responders to maintain their market competitiveness. We've seen some particularly challenging sides of the police and law enforcement with some getting some of those positions filled, as well as knowing that we've got some pending retirements. So kind of along those lines, we made an adjustment of about 7% to keep up with that market competitiveness. So this plan has that annualization into effect, as well as the 2.25% public safety step that is predictable and is solid and provides further compensation for our sworn law enforcement personnel, as well as our emergency communication center officers. So again, with all of that, public safety is making up 40% of that total overall increase. So again, you see the schools increasing, our public safety is increasing, as well as some general fund merit as well. There's a 2.5% merit on our side as sort of one of those austere measures that we hope we can increase maybe by the time we get to January, if things get better. But this plan has that 2.5% built in there as a stable thing that we know we can provide to our employees over this budget cycle. So tax relief, we've already talked about that 89% proposed rate already, but what you can see here is that history of the rate going back to 1997. Other than 2015, that trend has been going down. So as you can see with that FY26 budget, this will be the first time the county has ever been in the 80-cent range, as well as that consistent reduction over the last 4 years since 2021 that you can see. So we have been able to cut that rate consistently while not putting a hamper on any other services or have to cut those or key initiatives over the years. Within the tax relief category, we want to make sure we're paying close attention to our senior population who live on those fixed incomes. They've been, hit particularly hard by inflation, as well as some other factors over the last recent years, post-COVID specifically. The Board of Supervisors has done a really good job of bolstering that program, as you can see with that history of the program cost all the way back from 2009 to current. It does have a veteran component to it, but we've really been attentive to the needs of our senior population. with adding $5 million to this program with the FY26 budget, so that we can monitor those economic conditions over the year and possibly amend that criteria of the program so we can keep those who are currently in the program staying, but also maybe grow the program if there becomes a particular pain point over that time frame over the next few months. Some other highlights of the general fund budget. These colors correlate back to that big math problem we saw a few slides ago. Again, I'm not going to walk through everything, but just want to hit on some of those highlights that we have here. As an organization, we do have some contractual obligations that we have to take care of. Like you, we are feeling inflationary pressures as well, specifically in the technology sphere. We're also bringing on a new financial system over the course of this budget. So this plan has those day-to-day operation costs built into it. Our financial system, for those of you, has been in place since 2008. So a new system comes with those new operating costs shared between all county departments, including our school system, as well as HR and payroll, and is really the backbone of our organization and the processes that we do. Those other two boxes, you can kind of think of those as new initiatives per se, but again, very small in the realm of things, less than $3 million. We're really taking a measured approach with this budget when it comes to expanding capacities for new initiatives and new personnel. One thing to note in that purple box, that first bullet, after COVID, the county received some American Rescue Plan Act funds of about $60 million. A lot of that was used towards one-time funding costs, capital facilities and things of that nature, school buildings. One of the things we did with that too was pilot 2 new fire and EMS programs. As you can see, the mobile integrated health and peak demand ambulance programs. Over the last year since we've had those in place, those programs have proven to be very effective when it comes to spinning up, ambulances during peak times or getting some in-home care for people to not necessarily have to dial 911. This budget proposes to make those 12 positions and those programs permanent, continuing to build on that success we've seen over the last couple of years. So this is a measure we put in every year. If you look at our presentations every cycle, we'd like to talk about this. This is the total cost of general government services when you account for both population and inflation. We are a growing county. As we grow, our services are going to increase. There's no way to get around that. But we have to take more care of more people. So that obviously plays a factor in our budget growth, but also inflation. As we just talked about, everyone knows that would also play a key role as the cost of goods and services rise over that time period. Taking both of those into account and adjusting the budget for that is able to give us a little clearer picture on per capita spending over the last years. Going back to FY 2012, though, you can see by that green lime color line on the chart, we have relatively stayed flat in our general government spending, indicating that we are still able to provide services to you all as well as the community at a relatively maximized cost and efficiencies. So again, talking about some efficiencies and some cost control strategies, we're trying to find that balance with this 26 budget going forward. Almost $7.2 million we were able to identify with some internal reallocations and efficiencies as part of this plan. I don't think we do a good job highlighting it sometimes, but our budget department really takes a hard look every year at departments' line items. We go through it with a ruler line by line, finding any money where we can, repurposing that into better fitted situations. Also looking at existing vacant positions to be sure that they can be reallocated to a better purpose wherever they may be. On the county side, you can see we're not planning on issuing any new bonds for capital projects for a year. Schools is still planning to issue some so we can continue that progress on our school buildings. But on the county side, that year off will save us a little bit of breathing room on our debt service payments. Use of savings, or use of reserves, you can see set at 0 for 26. Again, that's one of those cost control strategies that for some reason, if we need to use any of that savings account, we have the capacity to do so. And again, we talked about that 2.5% merit. as we are going through this cycle over the next few months, if things continue to possibly improve or, get better, there is some possibility that that could increase back to some of our regional peer levels. But knowing that we've got that 2.5% in there built as a solid foundation for our employees is there. Lastly, we talk about capital projects. I'm not going to get kind of in the weeds about this one per se, but delayed distribution of some of our select capital projects. Starting in the fiscal year, we want to see about 90 days of good economic activity before funding some of those projects, which would give us a little more control in the capital sphere.
So now I'll go over some of the aspects of the capital improvement program, and thank you, Shane, for passing that off to me. This next slide, if it'll go, maybe. Okay, there. Nope. Okay, this next slide is my favorite out of the entire slide deck. I think it really just captures the essence of how different county and federal government are. And with all the attention that's been given to federal government recently, we felt as though it was important for us to dispel the notion that local government is similar to federal government, specifically as it relates to debt. Some important differentiating factors between us and the federal government are, one, that we are required by law to have a balanced budget, while the federal government can and does budget at over $1 trillion deficit. Two, the county does not borrow money to finance day-to-day operations, while the federal government does. That being said, the county's debt position is something we take very seriously, as that allows us to maintain our AAA bond rating, which in turn allows the county to borrow money at a lower cost. So this next slide's about our debt position and the various policy ratios we have in place. So key to managing our debt position are these debt policies, which govern how much we can borrow and ensure we are within appropriate levels as it relates to these key debt ratios. You'll see that all the first three arrows are going down from 23 to 2024, indicating our debt position is even stronger than the year prior and well within the parameters outlined by our debt policies. That last metric is one that Matt Harris is a big fan of, and what it tells us is that if we were not to issue any more debt, then we would pay off nearly 70% of all our outstanding debt within 10 years. In total, all these ratios are the core of what allow us to maintain that AAA rating that was previously mentioned. So this is a quick header, but when we are looking at how our capital improvement plan is funded, nearly 2/3 of it is funded through cash, while only 1/3 is funded through debt. Having such a large portion of our CIP funded through cash allows us to have that small dot from a couple slides back, as I mentioned. So here are some of the CIP uses. So these are the largest categories for this year's CIP, but this graphic breaks out how those funds are being allocated by each respective category. You'll see the largest portion, which accounts for $187 million of funding going towards community infrastructure, or simply put, roads within the county. The second largest slice is our major maintenance bucket, which is crucial in taking care of our existing assets and ensuring their longevity. And the third largest portion is for referendum projects, which we'll get into here on this next slide. So just a high-level overview of the referendum, which was approved back in November of 2022. You can see in the middle there that there are a healthy number of projects in the pipeline that have already been issued for. Included in that list is the Enon Library, several parks-related projects, and a couple of fire and police stations that are underway. With all those projects in mind, this CIP doesn't include a planned bond issuance for the county in FY2026, and this is just an additional safeguard given the current economic conditions while we continue to make progress on the projects that have already been issued for. And now I'll hand it over to Shane to wrap up the presentation.
Thanks, Coleman. So Major maintenance, we kind of put the slide in here to give some eyesight on, what that ambiguous term may mean. HVAC is a good example. Here you see some of those pictures of some county facilities, HVAC systems around our buildings. They're large, they're huge projects that have to be maintained. I'm sure, as most of you can attest, if your AC goes out in the summer, you're not happy. So we want to make sure that our customers and taxpayers that come into our buildings are happy as well. So along those same lines, we have to make sure that we are investing in these systems, whether it be our jail or juvenile detention home, as we need to keep up with those to be able to run at all times throughout the year. Also in that major maintenance space, getting into the business of taking care of our facilities outside of school buildings, there's a lot of community involvement with some of these spaces, whether you're going to play pickleball or tennis at the parks. We want to make sure that those facilities are in top-notch condition when you get there. So there are some funds set aside in this year's budget as we go through those capital planning projects to be able to include some maintenance for specifically, some tennis courts starting in FY2026 to be able to maintain those assets as well. Similarly, on the park side, we're not planning on adding any new parks with this plan, but rather improving our current park system, specifically Rockwood Park with its 50-year anniversary, as most of you may have seen with some of our news blasts. So we have allocated some funding in this plan to ensure we are able to keep up with those growing demands for utilization at all our parks and school facilities. And lastly, while not a part of the general fund, I think we can all attest that water has been a hot topic recently, specifically around the region. Fortunately for Chesterfield, we are in a good position. Right now, as I speak, we have 3 sources of water that we can draw from with our utility system, those being the James River, Swift Creek Reservoir, and Lake Chesden. Even before those issues and the unfortunate situation that happened in Richmond recently, we were already pursuing a 4th water source option. We have identified a location just west of the 295 bridge in the tidal basin of the Appomattox River. So again, you're not going to have those kind of drying ups that could happen during hot summer months as a 4th water source for the county. Being able to secure this 4th water source over the plan of this budget not only secure us in our water source capacity, but will also be able to provide us steady and consistent water that you can count on both the commercial and residential side. So with that being said, what's ahead? As you can see, we have one more community meeting in the Matoaka district at Matoaka Elementary School tomorrow evening. After that, we have the annual proposed budget public hearing here at the public meeting room. So again, you can come out and let the Board of Supervisors know your feedback on the proposed budget. April 9th, we have the budget planned adoption date. By law, we have to adopt the budget by May 1st. So April 9th gives us that flexibility to be able to do that. Key thing I want to note on this slide too is the additional budget updates. More so that this process does not end after budget adoption. We will continue to provide updates to the Board of Supervisors and public meetings as the economy takes its course and more policy initiatives and things of that nature get released. So again, this is not the last of the steps when it comes to the 26 budget. We will continue to monitor over the next few months as things roll out. And lastly, on the right side, if you want to, you can submit your feedback for the proposed budget either by emailing blueprint@chesterfield.gov or using our budget feedback form, chesterfield.gov/budgetfeedback. So with that, we have our team here with us in the room, pulling together any questions you may have had in the chat, and we will answer those as we can. So we have one of our first questions. What are the main priorities of this year's budget? Again, I think we've kind of hit that along throughout the presentation, but one of those is maintaining our stability in economic uncertainty. Again, we are unsure where things are going to go over the next couple of months. So we're taking that wait and see approach when it comes to the FY26 budget. Another thing is providing that meaningful tax relief, whether it be real estate cuts, personal property relief, or as well as tax relief for the seniors and veterans. We are able to continue to invest in those core services and not have to worry about taking a step back over the next few months with the budget in play. Next question: are there any new fees or tax changes in this budget? Do you want to take it?
Sure. So there's no new fees or taxes included in this budget, which you'll be glad to know. And if anything, taxes are going down, and we have, as we mentioned in the presentation, lots of tax relief measures included in the budget.
All right, we have another question. How exposed is the county to federal revenues? Sure, yeah. I mean, you can read in the news a lot of things happening at the federal level, whether it comes to cuts, proposed cuts, and things across that nature. Luckily, the general fund budget is minimally exposed to federal revenues. It's about 1%. A lot of that is concentrated in our social services. On the schools front, there is some federal aid for food services and instruction, but again, we are lucky here at the county to not have a super big part of our budget be a part of federal aid.
So another question I think we just saw, what was the determining factor in choosing Rockwood as compared to other parks for improvement? It's one of our oldest parks, it's one of our most used parks, and it's only fitting that it is the 50th anniversary. So if you're a longtime Chesterfield resident, you're very well aware how ingrained Rockwood is into the community. So there are going to be some great improvements that will really elevate the park. And it looks like that is all the questions we have.
Yep. So thank you all for joining us. If you still do have questions or would like to provide that additional feedback, we do have that blueprint at chesterfield.gov, as well as the chesterfield.gov/budget feedback form that you can use. With all that said, I hope you all have a great evening, and we look forward to hearing you all at the public hearing.